22nd of July 2016, and with much anticipation, a new water park opens in provincial Thailand. As is usually the case with new businesses in Thailand, there was a big official opening ceremony, and I attended after receiving a VIP invitation. The opening ceremony was attended by many official dignitaries, including the provincial governor. The opening ceremony had mascots for the kids, and he even employed pretties. A pretty is a job description in Thailand. You can see here the girl in the blue dress, and these are just pretty girls that attend this kind of thing. The new owner put in a huge investment, and he really did a good job. It was on rented land, so he had to rent the land. Then he had to prepare it himself. He concreted it first and then put on artificial turf. He had to buy all of the inflatable pools and the permanent pools, all the filtration equipment, all the life jackets, and had to pay for all the staff, administration staff in the offices, staff to work in the restaurant, and staff to work outside in the pools. He did an excellent job, and there was really no expense spared. Let's look at prices, and pricing was done by height. So small kids under 90 centimetres have one price, 91 to 140 centimetres, and then adults. And older citizens over 65 were letting free. And unfortunately, there are two prices. There's one price for Thais and one price for foreigners. Kon Thai on the left and Tang Chat on the right. And if this happened in a Western country, if this went on in Europe or North America, there would be absolute outrage. Hell would break loose if you had a more expensive price for foreigners. But in Thailand, it's perfectly normal. So small kids under 90 centimetres, if they're Thai, 100 baht. Bigger kids, 200 baht. And adults, 300 baht. Now, my two kids fall into the taller category. And if you just went into the park to watch your kids, not to go into the water, just to keep an eye on your kids, you had to pay. So if two adults go in, say me and my wife, that's 600 baht. And then the two kids is 400 baht. It's 1,000 baht just for a visit to the water park. So obviously the guy put in a lot of investment and he needed to recoup his investment, but it was quite expensive. However, on the opening day, there was a special deal for a family pass. It was just 2,200 baht, and it gave you unlimited access for a complete year for a whole family. And considering the daily rate, that was an excellent deal, so I bought one of those family passes. However, after all the expense and effort of building the park, this is what it looked like about 2 years later. What happened? This is the water park in 2020. And it's been like this for a couple of years, just been completely abandoned. The guy was renting the land and he's obviously given up doing that, and he's sold all the equipment. This pool is fairly permanent, so it's still here. There were others, but they were of a more temporary nature, and they've gone. I guess they've been sold. They must have been quite expensive. They are all located here. You can still see the concrete bases where they were. And there's just nothing now. Over here is where you could buy some refreshments, food and drinks. Nothing there now. There were toilets and changing rooms over in this direction. Also the office where the administration staff worked. And there was a small shop where you could buy swimming gear and souvenirs. And now it's just all abandoned and it's starting to become quite overgrown. This was the entrance here. And this was the ticket booth. And at the front was the car park. This was quite busy for the first few months, even in the second year, there were very few customers. I went past virtually every day, and maybe there was just 1 or 2 cars in the car park. I can't tell you exactly what the reasons were, but I can give you some general observations after living in Thailand for a number of years. And the first is that the one thing you don't want to be in Thailand is an employee. The wages are very low. We're talking about graduate salaries of 15,000 baht a month, which is less than $500 US. You know, that's after doing 15 years at school and then 4 years at university. And many foreigners seem to think that Thailand is a really cheap country, but actually it's not these days. And 15,000 baht doesn't get you anywhere at all. If you want somewhere to live, you need to run a vehicle, but you have to buy food. And if you've got kids, then it starts to get really, really expensive. So every Thai wants to run a business, but there's not a lot of business acumen. Over the years, I've seen so many new businesses open and then close because of lack of custom. And there's also a tendency just to copy other businesses. And around the time this opened, there were a number of other water parks in the country that had opened, and they've been quite successful. So I guess the guy thought, well, you know, we can open one here. There weren't any water parks at the time. Shortly afterwards, another water park opened, and that was one of the problems. There was suddenly a lot more competition for a limited market. And secondly is the location. The other water parks that had opened and been successful were in areas of Thailand where there are lots of foreign tourists. And when foreign tourists come for a couple of weeks holiday, they will spend half a day at a water park. That's something they will do. So there's regular business. In this part of Thailand, there are tourists, but they tend to be mainly from Malaysia and Singapore. And when they come to visit for the weekend, they like to shop, they like cheap massages, they like to eat, and going to a water park isn't really one of the things that they want to do. So it's only locals. And with this type of thing, when you come and do it, it's not the sort of thing that you want to do every week, which is what I found with my kids. You know, sort of once in a while. And it's also very expensive. The family pass that we bought initially was good value, but if you don't have one of those, or if you didn't have one of those, and you just came for one day, and there's 2 adults and you've got 2 kids that are over 90 centimetres in height, that's 1,000 baht. And the graduate salary here is 15,000 baht. So to come to the water park is equivalent to 2 days' salary. That's quite expensive. So the first year, there were people who I think, like me, had bought this yearly pass and just used the pass. And when that expired, there was no sort of more desire to visit. Occasionally in the car park, I used to see big tour buses from the 3 southern provinces that are suffering from insurgency. Because of the insurgency problems, there's nothing to do down in those provinces. So a lot of people sort of come here for their shopping and their leisure activities. But that's all that really was keeping it going. I actually feel a bit sorry for the guy who opened it, because I met him. He was a nice guy, and he did everything right. He got good equipment. There was a very good water filtration system. And it must have been costing him a fortune. He had to rent the land. I think this land is about 11 rai, so it's quite big. And obviously there's a big cost with water, and also electricity, keeping all the filtration equipment running. And he also had to pay for staff. There were staff in the office, and there were lifeguards outside. So it was quite an expensive operation to run, and you need quite a few customers to justify the costs. And after the first year, that just wasn't happening. So, you know, this was inevitable that after a while it would close. Business is tough in Thailand. My wife is an employee, she's a teacher, and she doesn't particularly enjoy her job, she doesn't get much money. So ever since we've been married, she's been trying to think of some kind of business to do. But it needs to be exactly the right product or service, it needs to be exactly the right price, and it needs to be exactly the right location. What would work in somewhere like Phuket, where there's a lot of foreign tourists, wouldn't work in other areas of Thailand where there are no tourists. With things like food, Thais are very fussy about the type of food they will eat, and they're very fussy about the price. If they don't like something, they won't go back, and if something's a few baht too expensive, they won't go back either. It needs to be just right. Because of the low wages, most Thais don't have a lot of disposable income. So in other countries where people do have disposable income, they can afford little luxury, non-essential things, but that's not really the case in Thailand. So if you're going to set up a business selling a product or service, it needs to be something that's essential. And if it's something like this, a leisure activity, it needs to be at the right price. You know, so many Thais, if they've got 2 kids, they just can't afford 1,000 baht to visit a water park. This land was originally intended for housing. One guy owns it. He owns about 100 rai, I think. And adjacent to this, there are housing developments. And the first phase was successful. That started around 7 or 8 years ago. And then he started on a second phase of housing. And that was around the time that the economy started to go downhill very badly. So that hasn't been successful at all. I think in the second phase there's about 150 houses and there's very few people living there. And he was planning to do a third phase on this piece of land. But because the second phase wasn't successful, the third phase didn't even get off the ground. So he decided to rent out the land for this water park. And after a year, it was evident that the water park wasn't going to be successful either. All along the back is where the water filtration equipment was located, and there was a lot of it. I don't know how much capacity these pools have, but this pool here is pretty big. There must be several million gallons of water in there, and this filtration equipment was running all the time. So in addition to maintenance, I guess you have to put fresh salt in there and pay the electricity bills. So this place must have been very expensive to run when it was going. In addition to the car park at the front, there are also car parking spaces around the back. And looking at the number of car parking spaces, he was obviously anticipating a lot more business than he actually got. And I just think he miscalculated. He read the market wrong. Just before it opened, I think there was a big water park built in Hua Hin, which has a lot of foreign expats and a lot of foreign tourists. And the business model for that one might have looked pretty good. But this part of Thailand is completely different because you don't get as many Europeans and North Americans here. This is the exit and entrance. And in addition to all the daytime staff, there was also a 24-hour security guard. And of course he had to pay wages for that as well. Quite sad actually what's happened. You know, if no one was prepared to open new businesses, there wouldn't be anything new for people to enjoy. But when you do open a new business in Thailand, especially a big one like this, you take on quite a lot of risk. These were the toilets and changing rooms. Now it's just all abandoned and overgrown. And once again, the land is up for rent. The Thais seem very reluctant to actually sell land. You see a lot of signs saying land for rent. They're happy to rent it out so it remains their property, but they're unwilling to sell it. And I guess what the owner's thinking is that in the future the economy will get better again. There'll be another house building boom as there were a few years ago, and then he'll be able to continue where he left off. Now, when that's going to happen, or even if it's going to happen, I don't know. So I think after this year, with the COVID crisis, I really do think that the world has changed permanently.